before we dive into the detail, we really need to understand the main reasons for recalls first. And that's why I've created this graph. In this graph, you see the last 5 months, so January until May this year, and the total number of recall notifications around the globe. And the top level, which was in March, is around 1,400. So you see there's literally around 1,000 or even more recalls every month around the globe that are announced through the authorities. And so in real life you can say there might even be a few more. If you look at the top contributors here, because these are listed, and at the very top you might see pesticides or import refusal and salmonella, but that's not the real top as we look at it, because as you might see, all the pathogenic bacteria, so salmonella and listeria and another type of salmonella we see here, and ecoli at the bottom, are all spelled out separately. So if we look at that group, it's already a much bigger group than just the pesticides. And the same thing holds true for undeclared allergen, because usually every allergen that's undeclared gets listed separately. So in this list we already see, for instance, dairy as being an undeclared allergen, or multiple allergens which are undeclared as well. So in the end, pesticides, really at the top here, is not the biggest cause for recalls. If you really look at this list, and the top 3 is very consistent over the years, we see that number 1, as usual suspects, is microbiological contamination. So that's where we're talking about all the pathogens like salmonella, listeria, E. coli, Clostridium botulinum, and so on. You will know them. The second largest group is usually the undeclared allergens. And very often undeclared allergens boil down to basically bad documentation or incomplete labeling, and sometimes indeed mistakes of suppliers, as we will see later on in one of these examples I will share with you. And the third group is, and we haven't seen it on the list yet, it's foreign objects. So you see we have the microbiological, you might say allergens are chemical, and the physical, the foreign objects, as the main 3 causes for recalls globally. Having said that, it's time to dive into the detail. So what are the typical mistakes that companies do make when they start managing recalls? The biggest mistake that companies make in recall situations is not seeing this as an urgent and important task. And I'll give you some examples of that right now. The first example of this is that it all starts with taking a recall just as anything else and seeing it as a 9-to-5 mentality. Typically, recalls have a tendency to start Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. That's where you get a phone call like, oops, you had a wrong delivery, there was something wrong, you had a pathogenic bacteria in a raw material, or somebody found a labeling mistake and now you've placed product onto the market that has a labeling issue. And unfortunately, still there are a lot of companies where the quality manager, although he or she was notified at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, hasn't escalated it to her boss, hasn't escalated it to perhaps the crisis team, hasn't escalated it internally in his or her own team, and everybody just goes home at 5 o'clock and comes back Monday morning 9 o'clock to start working on the recall. So that's one of the biggest issues, that people don't really see it as an urgency. And it doesn't mean that you need to work 48 hours in a row, because you won't be able to think straight if you do that. But for sure, things don't stop at 5. You should always look, okay, what are the key things that need to be done today, that need to be done now, and really do them within your team, within your organization. And if it means overtime, yes, it means overtime. But linked to this, not seeing it as an urgency, is also what I would call not having clear roles and responsibilities. Very often a recall is just seen as the problem of the quality manager. Well, I can tell you it's not. In the end, it's the problem of the entire organization. And that's why if you want to manage a recall properly, you should have a dedicated strategic team that looks at things from a distance and can actually challenge the people who are busy in the operational part. And we'll come to that in a little bit more detail. It's very good to always have a small group of people who can sit back and look at the wider picture and challenge other people who've done the work. Only in that way, you're sure you're going to focus on the right things in the recall and you've looked at it wide enough. If we look at the operational team or teams, there's a lot that needs to be covered. Of course, there's a technical team that's busy doing the traceability, that's trying to understand what went wrong, if it's a bacteria, what type of bacteria is it, what were the measurements, can you measure it again, what verifications were done, and so on. But also you might need to have a commercial team, especially if there's a lot of customers or even consumers involved. Then communication with those customers and consumers is a specialist job and it needs true focus. So you might actually want to create a smaller team just focusing on that part. And communication in general is very important. Certainly if you're a stock listed company, the press might come and knock on your doors. You might get a lot of consumer requests and so on. So in general, communication is an important topic. And last but not least, it's always wise to have what we would call an ultimate decision maker. Because there might be discrepancies that you see or issues that you don't have a good or right answer to when the operational team does the analysis. And even in the strategic team, there might be people who oppose one direction versus people who oppose another direction. And then it's always good to have the ultimate decision maker, and that could be the company owner or your business group director who will take the final decision, because in the end it's his or her final responsibility to manage the company or that part of your organization. And those people should have their role to play in any recall. So it's certainly not something that only sits on the quality manager's plate.